Let's deep dive into a mind-blowing YouTube podcast created by artificial intelligence, where you will hear conversations by two AI agents in a way you've never imagined before. This isn't just a podcast, it's a journey into the future, crafted by AI, designed for you. Ready to have your mind blown? Let's begin.
All right, so today we're going to be looking at the strategy of conflict.
By Thomas E. Schelling.
Thomas E. Schelling, that's right.
Yeah.
And this is a book that's had a huge impact, across a lot of different fields.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's a classic.
Yeah. So I think it's a good one for us to deep dive on.
For sure.
So what we're going to be looking at today is trying to understand how people make decisions when things are kind of, when the pressure's on.
Right, when the stakes are high.
When the stakes are high, exactly.
Yeah.
So, think of this book as like a secret weapon for understanding how people behave when, the pressure's on.
Yeah, absolutely. Like in a negotiation or standoff or any kind of conflict, really.
Exactly. And Schelling was really ahead of his time, I think, with this book.
Oh, yeah. He was applying game theory to all sorts of things you wouldn't really think about.
Yeah, and game theory is kind of one of those terms that sounds super intimidating.
Right. That sounds very academic.
Yeah. But I think it's actually more familiar than we think.
I think so, too. Like, we use game theory all the time without even realizing it.
Okay, so what is game theory? Like, how would you explain it in a way that anyone could understand?
Well, imagine you're playing chess, right?
Huh.
Every move you make depends on what you think your opponent's going to do next.
Right. You're always trying to anticipate their strategy.
Exactly. And that's what game theory is all about. It's about understanding how people make decisions when they know that other people are also making decisions that could affect them.
So it's like this constant back and forth, trying to figure out what the other person's going to do, and then planning your own move accordingly.
Exactly. And that applies to so many things, not just chess, but like business negotiations, international relations, even just deciding who's going to do the dishes.
Okay, so it's not just about global politics. This stuff applies to everyday life.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we're constantly engaging in strategic thinking without even realizing it.
That's kind of wild when you think about it.
It is, yeah. Like even something as simple as deciding what time to leave for work.
Right, to avoid traffic.
Yeah, you're using game theory, you're trying to anticipate what other drivers are going to do and choose the best time to leave based on that.
Okay, so let's dive into some of the specific concepts from Schelling's book.
Sure.
One that I keep hearing about is the prisoner's dilemma.
Yeah, that's a classic example in game theory. It really illustrates the whole idea of strategic thinking.
So break it down for us. What is the prisoner's dilemma?
Okay, so imagine you and a partner in crime get arrested.
Okay.
And you're being interrogated separately.
Oh, boy.
And the cops offer you a deal.
Okay.
If you confess and rat out your partner, you go free and your partner gets a long sentence.
Ouch.
But if you both stay silent, you both get a lighter sentence.
Okay, so there's an incentive to betray your partner, but also an incentive to cooperate?
Exactly. And that's the dilemma, because logically it always makes more sense to confess no matter what your partner does.
Really? Why is that?
Well, think about it. If your partner stays silent and you confess, you go free, which is the best possible outcome for you.
Okay, that makes sense.
And if your partner confesses and you confess, you both get a medium sentence, which is still better than the long sentence you'd get if you stayed silent and they confessed.
So either way, you're better off confessing.
Exactly, from a purely self-interested perspective, yes.
But wait, if both of you follow that logic, you both end up confessing and getting a medium sentence.
Right.
Which is worse than if you had both stayed silent and gotten a lighter sentence.
Exactly. That's the catch.
So sometimes being too clever backfires.
That's what Schelling's getting at.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes the most rational choice from an individual perspective isn't the best choice for the group as a whole.
It's a mind bender.
It is. It really challenges our assumptions about what it means to be rational.
So how do we avoid those traps? How do we get people to cooperate? Especially when there's this incentive to, screw each other over.
Well, that's where the power of commitment comes in.
Okay, commitment. I like the sound of that.
Yeah, Schelling argues that by making a credible commitment, you can actually change the entire game.
Credible commitment. I feel like I need an example here.
Okay, sure. Let's say you're in a negotiation, right?
Okay.
And you want to convince the other side that you're serious. You're not going to back down from your position.
Right, like I'm not bluffing.
Exactly. So what's the most convincing way to do that?
Well, I guess if I were really serious, I'd make it so I couldn't back down even if I wanted to.
Exactly. You'd make a commitment that's irreversible.
So it's like burning your britches.
Exactly. It's like that old saying, burn the ships when you land on enemy territory.
Oh, right. So you're literally eliminating the possibility of retreat.
Right. And by doing that, you're making your threat much more believable because the other side knows you're not bluffing.
So by taking away my own escape route, I actually gain more power.
That's the paradox of commitment. Yeah, sometimes strength comes from limiting your own flexibility.
That's counterintuitive.
It is, but it's a powerful idea.
So what are some real-world examples of this?
Well, think about treaties between countries. They're basically public commitments that are very difficult to break.
Right, because there are consequences if you violate a treaty.
Exactly. And that makes them much more effective than just, a handshake agreement.
So these commitments aren't just words. They actually change the way people behave.
Right, they reduce uncertainty, and that's a key part of Schelling's argument.
Okay, that makes sense. But let's be real. Not every situation involves treaties or, life or death decisions.
True.
How do these ideas about commitment play out in more everyday scenarios? Like, let's say I'm trying to buy a used car.
Yeah.
How do I use this commitment thing to get a better deal?
Well, you're not going to chain yourself to the steering wheel or anything.
Darn.
But the principle is the same. It's about understanding the other side's incentives and finding ways to align them with your own.
So like figuring out if they're more motivated by getting the highest price or just getting rid of the car quickly?
Exactly. You got to figure out what they're really looking for and then make a credible commitment that addresses their needs while also getting you closer to your goal.
So it's not just about being stubborn or inflexible. It's about being strategic with your commitment.
Yeah. It's about understanding the dynamics of the situation and making moves that benefit both sides in some way.
Okay, that's starting to make sense, but it still sounds kind of complicated.
It can be, but Schelling provides a lot of tools and frameworks to help us think about these things.
Okay, so what's another key concept that we should know about?
Well, how about focal points?
Focal points. All right, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
Okay, so imagine you and a friend are trying to meet in New York City.
Okay.
But you haven't decided on a location beforehand.
All right, so where do we meet?
Exactly, where would you go?
Probably Times Square.
Yeah.
It's kind of the obvious choice, right?
Exactly, and that's a focal point. It's a solution that stands out even without explicit communication.
Okay, that makes sense, but how does that apply to something like a business negotiation or an international conflict?
Well, think about a situation where two countries are on the brink of war, right?
Okay.
There might be a particular action like withdrawing troops from a disputed border that serves as a focal point for de-escalation.
So it's like a way to signal that you're willing to back down without losing face.
Exactly. It's a solution that seems natural and obvious to both sides.
Okay, so even in those high-stakes situations, these focal points can help guide people towards a peaceful resolution.
That's the idea, yeah. Schelling argues that focal points are incredibly powerful because they tap into these shared assumptions and understandings that we have even when we haven't explicitly communicated them.
That's fascinating.
It is. It really highlights how much of our behavior is shaped by these unspoken rules and conventions.
So it's not just about what we say, it's about what we don't say as well.
Exactly. And that's where things can get really interesting because sometimes those unspoken assumptions can lead to misunderstandings and conflicts.
Right, because what seems obvious to one person might not be obvious to another.
Exactly. And that's why communication is so important even when we think we're on the same page.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from game theory to strategic ambiguity and the importance of communication.
We have.
But before we move on, I want to ask you, what stands out to you as the most important insight from Schelling's work so far?
That's a tough one. But I think for me, it's the realization that conflict and cooperation aren't opposites. They're intertwined.
Okay, say more about that.
Well, even in the most intense rivalries, there's always potential for finding common ground and achieving mutually beneficial outcomes.
So it's not about crushing your opponent, it's about finding a way to work together, even if it's a bit messy and complicated.
Exactly. And that's the power of Schelling's thinking. It gives us a framework for understanding those complex interactions and finding a path towards a more cooperative and peaceful world.
That's a great takeaway, and I think it's a perfect place to pause for now.
Sounds good.
We'll be back in a flash to explore more of Schelling's brilliant and surprisingly relevant ideas.
Looking forward to it. So we were talking about how useful Schelling's ideas are.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing how relevant this book still is.
Yeah.
It was published back in 1960.
Yeah, he was way ahead of his time.
But does this stuff still hold up in today's world? I mean, things have changed a lot since the Cold War.
Oh, absolutely. I'd even argue it's more relevant now.
Really? Why is that?
Well, think about it. We're living in an age of globalization, hyperconnectivity,
Yeah.
social media.
Right, everything's so interconnected.
Exactly. And that means the potential for both cooperation and conflict has exploded.
So the more connected we are, the more we need Schelling's insights.
I think so. Yeah, it's like the game board just got a whole lot bigger and more complex.
And the players are more diverse, too. I mean,
Right.
we're not just dealing with nation states anymore.
Right, you've got corporations, NGOs, terrorist groups, all kinds of actors with different goals and motivations.
So it's not just about nuclear war anymore.
Nope. The types of conflicts we face are evolving too.
Like what?
Well, you've got climate change for one,
Okay, yeah, that's a big one.
cyber warfare, AI, all these challenges that require a deep understanding of strategic thinking.
So Schelling's ideas are like a Swiss Army knife for the 21st century.
I like that analogy.
So it's not just for Cold War strategists anymore.
Not at all. His work offers a timeless framework for thinking about conflict and cooperation, regardless of the specific context.
Okay, I'm sold on the relevance. But can you give us some concrete examples of how Schelling's ideas have actually played out in the real world?
Let's start with the big one, nuclear deterrence.
The Cold War.
Schelling's work was hugely influential in shaping Cold War strategy, especially the concept of mutually assured destruction, or MADI.
MAD-ED.
Right.
That always sounded kind of terrifying to me.
It was a pretty scary idea. The idea was that if both the U.S. and the Soviet Union had enough nukes to wipe each other out, neither side would risk starting a war.
So it was a giant game of chicken.
Yeah, but with incredibly high stakes.
And it worked.
Well, we avoided a nuclear holocaust, so I'd say it worked to some extent.
I guess that's a good thing.
Definitely. But Schelling's ideas go way beyond nuclear war. Think about diplomacy and international negotiations. Schelling's principles of focal points and credible commitments are constantly being used in those high-stakes situations.
Give me an example.
Take the negotiations between the U.S. and Iran over their nuclear program.
Oh, yeah, that was a tough one.
Both sides had very different goals, but they found common ground in preventing Iran from developing nuclear weapons.
Right. Nobody wanted to see that happen.
Exactly. And through sanctions, diplomacy, and credible commitments, they were able to reach an agreement at least for a while.
So even in the messiest, most complex conflicts, Schelling's ideas can help pave the way to a resolution.
That's the point. His work gives us a roadmap for navigating those complexities. And it's not just for diplomats and world leaders.
Really?
Yeah. Schelling's insights have also had a big impact on business and economics.
I wouldn't think boardrooms and battlefields have much in common.
You'd be surprised. Think about two companies competing in the same market, right?
Okay.
One company might announce a big investment in a new factory, for example.
Okay, so they're putting their money where their mouth is.
Exactly. And that sends a signal, we're here to stay, and we're going to compete aggressively.
So it's like a power move.
It is. And the competitor has to decide how to respond. Do they up their own investment, change their pricing strategy, fold? It's all about strategic interaction.
So CEOs are basically playing a high-stakes game of chess using Schelling's principles to outmaneuver each other.
That's one way to look at it, yeah. And it highlights how these ideas can be applied in all sorts of competitive situations, from negotiating a salary to launching a new product.
It's like Schelling's ideas are everywhere once you start looking for
They
them.
really are. It's a whole new way of seeing the world.
Okay, this is blowing my mind a little.
Yeah.
But what about something closer to home? Can Schelling's work help us navigate conflicts in our everyday lives? You know those arguments with our partners, our families, that annoying coworker?
Oh, absolutely. Schelling's insights are just as relevant in our personal and professional lives as they are on the global stage.
So how do we apply this stuff without needing a PhD in game theory?
Well, it starts with understanding the dynamics of strategic interaction. When you're in a conflict with someone, take a step back and try to understand their perspective. What are their motivations? What are their goals? What are they afraid of?
It's like that classic advice, seek first to understand, then to be understood.
Exactly. Once you have a better grasp of where the other person is coming from, you can start to look for common ground. What are the shared interests you can build on? What are the potential compromises that could work for both of you?
So it's less about winning and more about finding a solution that everyone can live with.
Exactly. And remember, communication is key. Be clear about your own needs and intentions. Listen actively to what the other person is saying. Often conflicts arise from simple misunderstandings or a lack of communication.
So Schelling's work gives us a framework for thinking about conflict, but it also emphasizes the importance of empathy and communication.
Right. It's not just about being strategic. It's about being human.
Yeah.
And that's what makes his work so powerful. It helps us navigate those difficult conversations and build more cooperative and fulfilling relationships.
This is seriously making me rethink how I approach conflict. I'm starting to see arguments and disagreements in a whole new light. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to bring it back to you. If our listeners could take away just one key insight from Schelling's work, what would it be?
That's a great question. I think if I had to pick one thing, I'd say it's that conflict isn't always a bad thing.
Okay, that's interesting. We usually think of conflict as something negative, something to avoid.
Yeah, we tend to shy away from it.
But you're saying it can actually be positive.
Yeah, in a way. Think about it. Conflict often arises when people have different ideas, different needs, different perspectives.
Like when people disagree.
Exactly. And that diversity can be incredibly valuable. It can lead to innovation, creativity, progress.
So it's like if everyone always agreed, we'd all be stuck in the Stone Age.
Haha, well, maybe not the Stone Age, but you get the idea. Conflict can be a catalyst for change, a way to challenge the status quo and come up with new solutions.
So it's not about avoiding conflict altogether. It's about approaching it in a way that's productive.
Exactly. And that's what Schelling's work is all about. It's about giving us the tools to manage conflict effectively, to harness that energy and channel it into something positive.
I like that. It's like turning lemons into lemonade.
Yeah, it's about turning those disagreements into opportunities for growth and understanding.
So it's not about crushing the other side. It's about finding a way to work together, even if it's a bit messy.
Right, and that's what makes Schelling's work so powerful. It gives us a framework for understanding those complex interactions and finding a path towards a more cooperative and peaceful world.
And that's a message I think we all need to hear right now.
Definitely. We're facing so many challenges in the world today that require cooperation and understanding.
Yeah, from climate change to political polarization, it seems like we're more divided than ever.
It can feel that way, but I think Schelling's work offers a glimmer of hope. It shows us that even in the most difficult situations, there's always potential for finding common ground.
Yeah, it gives us a reason to be optimistic.
Exactly. It's not about pretending that conflict doesn't exist. It's about recognizing that it's an inevitable part of human interaction and finding ways to manage it constructively.
So it's not about winning or losing. It's about finding a way forward together.
That's it. And I think that's a really powerful message.
Well said.
Yeah.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the strategy of conflict.
It's been a fascinating conversation.
It really has. And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has given you some new insights into the nature of conflict and how to approach it more strategically.
And remember, conflict can be an opportunity for growth and positive change.
Exactly. So the next time you find yourself in a disagreement, don't shy away from it. Embrace it. Use the tools we've discussed today to understand the other side's perspective, to communicate clearly, and to find that common ground that can lead to a better outcome for everyone.
Great advice.
Thanks. Until next time, keep diving deep.